During a high-stakes live television segment, Karoline Leavitt took center stage and delivered a powerful rebuttal to a set of harsh criticisms directed at a former U.S. president. In her signature no-nonsense style, she addressed the remarks with sharp precision, targeting the broader narrative that has been perpetuated by elite figures in entertainment and media. Her message was clear. Political discourse should be grounded in facts and accountability, not emotional outbursts from celebrities removed from everyday American concerns. Leavitt opened her remarks with a firm denouncement of what she described as a desperate tactic by political opponents, turning to well-known actors and public figures to shape the narrative leading into the election. She questioned the sincerity and political relevance of these individuals, pointing out that many of them have spent decades insulated from the realities faced by the American people. According to Leavitt, elevating their voices over the lived experiences of citizens across the country reflects a concerning disconnection from the electorate. She didn't stop there. With practiced composure, Leavitt brought the conversation back to issues she claimed actually mattered to Americans: the economy, border security, public safety, and international strength. By doing so, she made it clear that her goal wasn't to simply counter celebrity rhetoric, but to redirect the conversation entirely. Her strategy was to expose what she portrayed as the superficiality of the criticism and underscore the need to focus on results, not personalities. Leavitt also framed the moment as part of a broader pattern. She argued that when political campaigns are in trouble, when their record cannot stand up to scrutiny, they often resort to spectacle. In her view, this includes bringing in famous faces to make loud, emotional statements rather than offering real solutions. She emphasized that the American people are smart enough to see through such tactics, and that they are more interested in policies that affect their paychecks and safety than in performances staged for dramatic effect. She spoke passionately about what she sees as a betrayal of public trust. Rather than confronting facts or debating ideas, Leavitt claimed, some voices prefer to demonize their political opponents in increasingly extreme terms. These attacks, she argued, are designed to instill fear and division, rather than to build consensus or promote understanding. She challenged viewers to consider whether the use of celebrity influence in this way really benefits democratic dialogue, or if it simply contributes to further polarization. In a pointed moment, she made a broader cultural critique, stating that many in Hollywood and the media elite lives vastly different from the average American, and yet frequently try to dictate political morality. This, she argued, is why the political establishment is losing credibility. People are tired, she said, of being lectured by those who are disconnected from the challenges of daily life. Rising grocery bills, crime in their neighborhoods, and a feeling of powerlessness in the face of bureaucratic overreach. Leavitt also sought to draw a line between patriotism and partisanship. She insisted that loving one's country doesn't require blindly supporting any leader, but it does mean respecting the electoral process and the legitimacy of different perspectives. She argued that those who resort to public tirades and sweeping condemnations of political figures are undermining that principle, choosing spectacle over civic responsibility. As the segment continued, Leavitt maintained her stance with confidence, rarely allowing interruptions to knock her off course. Her message was one of resilience and clarity. The administration she supports will not be distracted by theatrics. Instead, she vowed that their focus remains on restoring economic strength, ending lawlessness, and putting America first. Every attempt to paint them as authoritarian or dangerous, she suggested, is a smokescreen to avoid addressing real policy debates. What made the exchange particularly striking was her ability to flip the narrative. Rather than responding defensively, she went on offense, turning the moment into a critique not of the speaker himself, but of a system that places more value on celebrity status than civic leadership. Her choice of words was careful but cutting, drawing applause from some quarters and outrage from others. Still, her presence made it clear that she intended to set the tone and not merely respond to it. Her performance during this segment served as a snapshot of the evolving political communications landscape, where spokespeople are not just relaying information but actively shaping the battlefield. In the face of cultural icons and public opinion influencers, she stood her ground and made the case for a different kind of engagement. one rooted in policy, not performance. In a compelling and unexpected moment during a nationally televised discussion, Karoline Leavitt found herself fielding a pointed question from Representative Jasmine Crockett concerning the current administration's approach to U.S.-Canada relations. The inquiry revolved around recent threats to increase tariffs and curtail electricity cooperation between the two nations, issues with the potential to ripple across trade, energy, and diplomacy. Leavitt, maintaining a poised and assertive demeanor, seized the opportunity not just to respond, but to reshape the narrative with striking clarity and bold political framing. She began by acknowledging the seriousness of the question, but quickly pivoted to challenge assumptions underlying the critique. Rather than treating Canada as an untouchable ally, Leavitt framed the relationship in more pragmatic terms. According to her, while historical alliances are valuable, they must not be taken for granted, especially if mutual benefit begins to erode. She argued that America's responsibility is first and foremost to its own people, and that the administration will not hesitate to reevaluate even long-standing partnerships if they no longer serve national interests. What stood out was her willingness to entertain ideas that would typically be considered politically provocative. Leavitt floated the notion that Canada, while once a close partner, may now be drifting into the realm of competition. She pointed to energy pricing discrepancies, regulatory imbalances, and trade practices she claimed were increasingly unfavorable to American workers. In her view, maintaining strong borders doesn't only mean geographical security, it means drawing firm economic boundaries, even with countries historically considered allies. She went further, presenting a controversial hypothetical that Canada could, under the right circumstances, be more valuable to the United States as a formal extension, what she referred to, in passing, as the potential 51st state. This comment was less about literal annexation and more about underscoring a perceived imbalance in the current relationship. Her implication was clear. Canada reaps immense benefit from its proximity and trade with the U.S., yet does not always reciprocate in ways that reflect a truly equal partnership. Leavitt emphasized that Americans are growing increasingly skeptical of foreign policy approaches that prioritize diplomacy at the expense of domestic prosperity. She cited mounting frustrations among working-class families who feel squeezed by rising utility bills and believe that current energy exports, including those to Canada, are contributing to their financial strain. Her message was that hard questions must be asked, even if they challenge diplomatic norms. Throughout the exchange, she stayed grounded in economic language, invoking statistics on trade deficits, employment, and energy dependence. She suggested that Canada's economic health is closely tethered to U.S. cooperation, and that continued goodwill should be contingent upon fairness and mutual accountability. Rather than romanticizing the cross-border relationship, she portrayed it as a transaction, one that must be constantly renegotiated to align with American interests. She also drew parallels between Canadian and American internal politics, hinting at shared struggles with inflation, overregulation, and public dissatisfaction with leadership. By framing the two nations' issues as intertwined, she positioned the U.S. as not only a partner, but a potential leader in regional reform. Her underlying argument was that bold leadership requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths, and that includes the reality that friendship between nations should not come at the cost of national security or prosperity. This approach marked a significant rhetorical shift from traditional diplomatic language. Where past officials might have focused on cooperation and continuity, Leavitt leaned into a narrative of strategic reassessment. She argued that protecting American jobs and resources must come before preserving any nostalgic notions of unshakable alliance. Her stance was unapologetically transactional, aimed at appealing to voters who view global cooperation with skepticism and prioritize self-reliance. Her remarks sparked a visible reaction on the panel, with some pushing back against what they interpreted as an overly aggressive posture. Still, she remained firm, reiterating that any nation, regardless of history, must be held to account if it becomes an impediment to American success. In this way, her argument was not anti-Canada, but pro-American in the clearest possible terms. She insisted that diplomacy must be driven by data, results, and the lived realities of everyday citizens, not sentimental traditions or unexamined loyalties. In presenting this view, Leavitt redefined the boundaries of what's considered acceptable in discussions about U.S. foreign policy. She challenged the idea that close allies should be above critique and emphasized that every relationship should be evaluated through the lens of reciprocity. Her performance made clear that the administration intends to approach international dealings with eyes wide open and with a mandate from voters to put American priorities first, even when that means disrupting long-held. Karoline Leavitt used the opportunity of a live televised discussion to defend and articulate the rationale behind one of the administration's most debated initiatives, sweeping government spending cuts, particularly those carried out by the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE. Facing questions from both the media and elected officials, Leavitt responded with firm conviction, framing these cuts not as callous or reckless, but as a necessary correction to years of bloated budgets, bureaucratic mismanagement, and unchecked federal waste. She began by pushing back on the common narrative that any attempt to reduce government spending inevitably harms vulnerable populations. According to Leavitt, the real harm lies in allowing inefficient agencies to continue draining taxpayer dollars without scrutiny. She described a system rife with redundancies, outdated programs, and misaligned priorities. The creation of DOGE, she argued, was never about dismantling support systems, but about restoring trust by ensuring that every public dollar is used responsibly and effectively. One of the most striking moments of her explanation came when she cited a staggering $71 billion in identified fraud within the Social Security system. This figure, she said, represented not just a budgetary issue but a moral one. While the public is often asked to accept higher taxes or fewer services in the name of fiscal responsibility, bureaucracies continue to bleed money through mismanagement and abuse. Leavitt made it clear that the administration considers rooting out this fraud not only a fiscal priority, but a promise kept to the American people. She detailed how DOGE had conducted top-down audits of several federal departments and discovered patterns of waste that had gone unaddressed for years. In some cases, she said, entire programs were found to be obsolete, funded year after year despite serving no clear public benefit. In other cases, agencies were overstaffed, overspending, or duplicating services already provided elsewhere. Leavitt positioned these findings as evidence that serious reform was long overdue and that meaningful change required more than symbolic gestures. Rather than shying away from the implications of these cuts, she leaned into them, asserting that streamlining the federal government was a necessary disruption. According to her, past administrations had failed to take on the entrenched bureaucracy because doing so invited political backlash. But the current leadership, she claimed, was willing to absorb the criticism in order to deliver real results. She likened it to restructuring a failing business. Tough decisions must be made to ensure long-term sustainability and efficiency. Leavitt also spoke directly to concerns about government workers affected by the restructuring. She acknowledged that reductions in staffing or reallocations of resources would cause discomfort, but insisted that reform was being implemented with fairness and transparency. No one was being targeted arbitrarily, she explained. Instead, decisions were being driven by data and performance metrics. The ultimate goal, she said, was not to eliminate government, but to make it leaner, smarter, and more accountable. She contrasted this approach with what she described as the culture of inertia that had plagued Washington for decades. In her view, the prevailing attitude had been to preserve the status quo, regardless of effectiveness or cost. Programs continued not because they worked, but because no one wanted to take responsibility for ending them. By establishing DOGE and empowering it to take decisive action, the administration aimed to reset expectations and bring the federal government in line with modern standards of accountability. Throughout her remarks, Leavitt emphasized that these measures had already begun to show results. She cited reductions in agency operating costs, decreases in procurement waste, and improved delivery of services as early indicators of success. More importantly, she said, the reforms were restoring public confidence in the institutions that serve them. People want to know their taxes are being put to good use, she insisted, and cutting wasteful spending was one of the most direct ways to deliver that assurance. What stood out was her ability to reframe budget cuts not as an austerity measure, but as a moral imperative. She spoke of the single mother working 2 jobs, the small business owner struggling under tax pressure, the retiree watching every dollar. For them, she argued, every wasted cent in Washington is a betrayal. It was for these people, she said, that the administration was committed to dismantling inefficiency and rebuilding trust in the system. By the end of the segment, it was clear that Leavitt was not interested in apologizing for the aggressive actions of Doge. On the contrary, she presented them as a badge of honor, evidence that the administration was willing to do what others would not. Her message was simple but firm. The government works for the people, not the other way around. And if that means challenging sacred cows and cutting through red tape, then so be it. Karoline Leavitt has quickly developed a reputation as one of the most assertive and unflinching communicators in modern political discourse. During a recent live television appearance, she once again demonstrated that her style of engagement is not rooted in cautious diplomacy, but in confrontation backed by firm convictions. Her approach to media strategy, particularly when dealing with hostile or biased questioning, reflects a broader shift in how some figures in public service interact with the press, replacing traditional deference with a demand for accountability and mutual respect. Throughout the segment, Leavitt displayed an unwavering commitment to controlling the narrative. When pressed with questions that she viewed as loaded or based on false premises, she didn't hesitate to push back, often turning the scrutiny around on the media itself. Her tone was sharp, her responses quick, and her refusal to accept the usual rhythm of media-politician interaction was unmistakable. Instead of playing defense, she made clear that she was there to challenge, not appease, what she considered to be a deeply entrenched bias in the press corps. She questioned the framing of questions, interrupted what she believed to be misleading characterizations, and even laughed off certain insinuations that she found to be absurd. This wasn't done out of disrespect, she implied, but as a way of exposing what she saw as the performative nature of some media coverage. Leavitt's communication strategy hinges on the belief that the press often acts less like neutral investigators and more like participants in a political game. Her job, in her view, is to strip that pretense away. In this particular exchange, her refusal to back down seemed designed not just for the audience in the room, but for the millions watching across the country. She knew that every clipped answer or deflected question could become a viral moment, not because of theatrics, but because of how clearly it stood apart from the polished, predictable responses that people have come to expect from public figures. Her style may be confrontational, but it resonates with a segment of the population that is frustrated with what they perceive as one-sided media narratives and soft-pedaled journalism. Leavitt also made a point of shifting the focus back to policy, redirecting questions away from optics and hypotheticals toward measurable results. When pressed on controversial topics, she responded with specifics, highlighting policy outcomes, legislative wins, and agency reforms. In doing so, she signaled that while she was fully prepared to handle political sparring, her real mission was to remind viewers of substance over spectacle. She repeatedly stated that while media soundbites may dominate headlines, it is long-term governance that truly matters. There was also an underlying message in her combative style, that standing firm in the face of criticism is not only necessary, but expected. Leavitt views the media as an extension of a political establishment that has long underestimated the public's intelligence and endurance. Her objective is not to win over skeptical anchors or pundits, but to connect directly with voters who have grown weary of what they view as coordinated narratives and selective outrage. Critics may call her approach brash or disrespectful, but supporters see it as refreshingly honest. She doesn't attempt to sugarcoat difficult truths, and she doesn't bother with platitudes. If a question strikes her as dishonest or manipulative, she calls it out. If a reporter misrepresents a policy, she corrects it without hesitation. This no-filter strategy appeals to many Americans who believe that civility in public discourse has too often been a cover for inaction or deception. Her media strategy also speaks to a larger transformation within political communication. The days of rehearsed answers and carefully polished sound bites are giving way to raw, unscripted exchanges that feel more authentic, even when they're contentious. Leavitt embodies this change. She treats each interview as a battlefield where clarity, confidence, and conviction matter more than finesse. Her communication is direct, sometimes polarizing, but rarely forgettable. Throughout the exchange, she maintained her composure, even when challenged aggressively. She demonstrated that being firm does not require being unhinged, and that pushing back does not equate to disrespect. By staying calm yet assertive, she managed to dominate the conversation without appearing flustered or reactive. Her ability to stay on message while navigating heated questions showcased a media savvy that is as strategic as it is instinctual. Ultimately, what makes Leavitt's approach so notable is how effectively she embodies a growing sentiment within the electorate, that the old rules of engagement have failed. She doesn't rely on conventional press strategies or carefully managed public relations efforts. Instead, she brings a clarity of message and a force of presence that makes her both unpredictable and highly effective in a media environment that rewards authenticity, even when it's delivered with sharp elbows. As the live broadcast drew to a close, Karoline Leavitt left a lasting impression, not just for what she said, but for how she said it. Her tone remained confident, unapologetic, and rooted in the belief that the American people are hungry for truth unfiltered by media gatekeepers or establishment spin. Rather than softening her message to appease critics, she leaned in, turning a panel discussion into a platform for political clarity and ideological defiance. Her performance wasn't about playing to the room, it was about speaking past it, directly to those watching at home who feel unheard and overlooked by the political class. Leavitt's final remarks served as a rallying cry. She called on viewers to reject fear-based narratives and manipulative rhetoric designed to sow division. Instead, she urged people to evaluate leadership based on outcomes, on policies that lower costs, secure borders, create jobs, and prioritize American interests over international appeasement. It was a direct appeal to those who feel that politics has become more about personalities and partisanship than practical solutions and measurable progress. She ended not with platitudes, but with a challenge. She invited viewers to question what they're being told, to scrutinize not only politicians, but the institutions that shape public opinion, from the press to academia to the entertainment industry. Her message was not simply that political opposition is misinformed or misguided, but that it is often willfully dishonest, relying on dramatics and celebrity endorsements rather than credible, fact-based argumentation. Leavitt also reminded viewers that being bold in defense of one's values does not mean being extreme. It means being consistent, standing firm under pressure, and refusing to let fear of backlash dictate the boundaries of acceptable opinion. She positioned this approach as not just her strategy, but as a reflection of a broader political realignment happening across the country, one where voters are demanding more authenticity, less deference to institutions, and real accountability from those in power. As the cameras stopped rolling, it was clear that her remarks had struck a nerve, both with those who strongly agreed and those who vehemently disagreed. But for Leavitt, that seemed to be the point. She wasn't seeking consensus, she was seeking clarity. In a media landscape saturated with ambiguity and spin, she offered a sharp and unwavering alternative. Conviction without apology, action over performance, and a willingness to challenge even the most sacred cows of political discourse. Her final words reinforced the essence of her message. That leadership means telling hard truths, standing firm in storms of criticism, and keeping focus on the people who matter most, the citizens whose voices are too often drowned out by noise from the top. Whether or not viewers agreed with every word, they could not deny the force with which it was delivered. In the end, Karoline Leavitt made one thing abundantly clear. She's not backing down, and she's not changing her message to